right, well, let's get started then. Like I said, I am Polanyi Cortez-Diaz with the Partnership for America's Children, and we are so excited today to have a webinar with Miriam Rollin of the Education Civil Rights Alliance. And just to get started, I'm going to introduce our presenter today. So Miriam Rollin is the founding director of the new National Education Civil Rights Alliance. She has been seeking improvements in policies and practices affecting vulnerable children, youth, and families for 3.5 decades. She most recently served for 16 years in leadership positions at the Council for Strong America, a national nonprofit that promotes evidence-based policies and approaches for vulnerable children and families at the national, state, and local levels. Perhaps most pertinent to this audience of partnership folks, she served as the VP for programs at the National Association for Child Advocates, working with the wonderful multi-issue and local, state and local children's policy and advocacy organizations, just like the folks we have on today's webinar. And so we are really grateful to have her with us today, and I think we're in for a real treat. Now, Miriam, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thank you so much, Polanyi, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. I'm really excited to be back in familiar territory with multi-issue children's policy advocates at the state and local level. So thanks for all the great work that you do and will continue to do for vulnerable kids and families around the country. So I want to start actually because I know many of you are probably parents or maybe even grandparents. I'm a mom of a 21-year-old daughter now. I often view things through the lens of a parent. So let's take a minute and imagine that we're the parent of any of the following kids. So a daughter who was sexually assaulted by another student and whose school told her that the solution to ongoing torment by the boy and his friends was for her to be sent to an educationally ineffective alternative school for kids with behavior issues. Okay, now let's imagine you're the parent of a daughter who got a message on Snapchat from her high school classmate that said, quote, "We should have hung all you blank racist slur while we had the chance." Okay, let's imagine you're the parent of an unarmed 54-pound, 8-year-old son in 3rd grade with ADHD who was handcuffed by a school resource officer behind his back and above his elbows, and the reason given for that particular restraint was that the restraints would have slipped off his wrists. He was too small. A federal judge, by the way, recently ruled that it violated the child's constitutional rights. So those are the kind of situations that give rise to questions of needing to enforce our education civil rights laws at the federal, state, and local level. So all across America today, far too many students are facing many of these challenges that are education civil rights related, including failure to enroll students, particularly immigrant students, bullying, harassment, and violence based on a variety of factors. It could be based on race, on gender identity, on religion, really on disability, any of a variety of factors. Excessive suspension and expulsion of students, particularly students of color and special education students. Use of restraint and seclusion, as in one of my examples, and other discriminatory barriers to education. And as I said, those are based on any of a variety of student characteristics that are, in fact, protected classes under our civil rights laws. Sadly, we are hearing reports over the past year and a half, although we don't have the formal data yet, but we have heard reports about these discriminatory barriers actually increasing over the past year and a half rather than decreasing. But the good news is, despite some proposed and some actual changes in some guidance and even some regulations, the laws and most of the policies of our nation, states, and localities still provide many civil rights protections for students from these barriers to education, including federal laws that are still fully intact, such as Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, Title IX of the Education Amendments, Section 504 of the Rehab Act, IDEA, Americans with Disabilities Act, etc. And that these federal, state, and local education authorities are mandated to uphold these civil rights protections. Now, the Education Civil Rights Alliance, so the organization that I'm now privileged to direct, was launched on just November 2nd of last year, and it was launched to fight back against these increasing attacks on student civil rights around the country at the same time that we were seeing a weakened federal enforcement approach to education civil rights. And so the Education Civil Rights Alliance members and the Alliance as a whole believes that schools should serve, educate, empower, and be safe for all students. Our membership in the Alliance includes powerful state and community groups, the two largest nation's teachers' unions, NEA and AFT, several legal and civil rights organizations that are the pinnacle of legal and civil rights enforcement actions nationally, such as ACLU, Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, et cetera. And then a variety of other influential national associations, state and local organizations that have a lot of experience in and deep commitment to protecting student civil rights. And for the full list, you can see it's a variety of organizations, and frankly, it's just the beginning. So I was hired October 2nd. We launched November 2nd. There are many, many organizations we haven't even asked to join yet. And so we will have many more members a year from now. We're growing every day. So what are some of the issues that the Education Civil Rights Alliance will be working on? Things like enrolling immigrant students and English language learners, helping undocumented kids stay in school, services for English language learners in school, services for youth that might be transitioning to or from the child welfare or juvenile justice systems, and also homeless youth, identification of services for and also discipline actions against students with disabilities, accommodations for transgender students, for pregnant and parenting students, the very extensive disparities based on race in suspension and expulsion, and also the disparities for kids who are identified as having disabilities, very high rates of suspension and expulsion for them as well. Restraints and or seclusion, discipline due process, law enforcement in schools, sexual and gender-based bullying, harassment, and violence, etc. So on those issues, what does the ECR Alliance plan to do? We will be developing and sharing tools and resources, whether it's materials, training, technical assistance, for a variety of state and community activists, and as well as education agencies that really want to do the right thing and want some help in order to do that. We're also going to support in-state attorneys and also take legal action against violations of student civil rights against education agencies at any level, local, state, and federal, who do not do the right thing and protect student civil rights. We're working on helping state attorneys general. Some of them have been very active, like New York and California have been very active on enforcement actions in the education civil rights field. Some are interested in doing more, but haven't yet done a lot in the education sphere. Some have done guidance, and others would like to do guidance. So we really want to create some peer supports across state AGs to help encourage more of those players to do more enforcement actions and also issuance of guidance, particularly as more and more of the federal guidance is going away. And, you know, schools still need to figure out what they should be doing to comply with the law. And guidance from an AG can be very, very helpful. Raising public awareness regarding the fact that there are violations of marginalized students' civil rights that happen every day, and that the laws still exist to protect those students, and that, in fact, there are people that are prepared to take action as needed in the courts to enforce those laws, and also action by AGs and others. And finally, to hopefully, in the combination of doing all of these things, to serve as a deterrent to discriminatory and illegal behavior. So how are we starting this work? What we're doing is we would love to be able to say we can work on all of these issues in all 50 states right from the get-go. That would be unrealistic, and so we're not doing that. So instead, we're going to be selecting from a pool of 15 states that have been identified. They're on this slide. And so from those 15, we'll be talking to folks on the ground and exploring what the education civil rights kind of leaders in the state believe are the unaddressed priorities that need to be addressed in their state with regard to education civil rights. And we'll pick maybe 8 to 10, probably 8, first cohort states in early March to further develop the work and develop partnerships between the national players and the state and local players in the selected states. And each year we hope to add additional states. So what are the decisions in terms of state selection based on? What are some of the selection factors? So the most important factors are having a there in terms of statewide education civil rights advocacy groups that are active, particularly in the litigation sphere, because this will not be policy advocacy. This will be related to litigation, with whom ECR Alliance can partner. And having those statewide groups really excited about working with the ECRA Alliance. You know, if we're told by folks leading on education civil rights issues in those states, you know what, we got this, then that's fine. Well, there's plenty of other states that would like our help. So we really do want to listen to the state allies, both in terms of what specific issues, what specific causes of action are needed for potential action, but also whether or not to go into that state in the first place. We also want to make sure we're dealing with states that have a decent number of students who are in marginalized subgroups. So that's why you don't see on the list, Maine and New Hampshire and the Dakotas. And I apologize for anyone from those states who's on the call, but, we want to at least start in places that where we feel like we can have the most bang for the buck. And then finally, making sure that similar factor related to bang for the buck, that the states that we're going into do in fact have a fair extent of education civil rights violations that haven't yet been addressed. And then other state selection factors, these are ones that aren't dispositive one way or the other, but just things that we're looking at as we go into states. So to what extent are there strong state and local laws or constitutional provisions? What do the courts look like? Are they favorable? Is there a friendly AG? I already mentioned that, an attorney general. Is there one thing that is important overall in the cohort that we select is to have some geographic diversity, so that we have some East Coast, some West Coast, some in the middle. And then a small factor, but something related that's important, is quality of their Office of Civil Rights data. To what extent can we rely on that data in terms of bringing cases? So that's kind of where we are. So we launched in November. We're doing state selection. We'll make decisions in early March about which states, and then from there we'll start doing the work and partnering with state and local allies on education civil rights, both cases as well as any training, technical assistance, materials development, et cetera, that folks would like our help on. And here's my contact information. Happy to hear from any of you if you have follow-up questions that don't get addressed on this webinar, or any interest in potentially joining some of the meetings we're having. We've already had some of the meetings in some states, and we're planning on having others over the next month. So happy to talk to you all about that. And so now I would love to open it up and see what questions you all have, and have a discussion about any possible areas of work that might make sense in terms of partnering, whether it's might be amicus briefs. It might be maybe you all have connections to some groups on the ground that could be organizational plaintiffs that have direct service relationships with kids whose education civil rights may have been violated. Or you may have connections even with individual families whose kids' rights have been violated that could be individual plaintiffs. Maybe you have data that might be useful in some of the cases that we're working on. And you also may have policy situations where you're working on a policy solution. Unfortunately, the particular legislature or executive that you're working with is not very amenable to that particular solution, and you're thinking, is this maybe time to try a litigation solution rather than a legislative solution? So, and also you may have relationships with state attorneys general that you've worked with on a variety of issues that you think might be helpful on education civil rights issues. So any of those things, I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts, but also open to any questions you have specifically about the Education Civil Rights Alliance and what we hope to do.
All right, folks. Actually, because we have a very small number of people on the line, I think it would be really great to open it up if people want to ask.
The conference has been unmuted.
Sorry. If you want to just pose your questions over the line. And then we can just have this conversation more open for if you have questions for Miriam that you'd like to ask. So yes, please present your questions. Just feel free to go ahead and ask. And Miriam, if you want to similarly maybe restate your own questions for folks so that it can be more interactive.
Sure. Well, I can just start with, does anyone have any kind of specific questions about the Education Civil Rights Alliance? Was someone speaking up? I couldn't hear that.
There was a bit of an echo, and so I had to actually go back and mute somebody, but I'll reach out to them separately.
Okay. Got it. So any questions, or was I so thorough and complete in explaining that I left absolutely nothing to the imagination?
So somebody actually presented us a question over the chat function, so they might be a little shy, maybe don't have audio working, but they have said, they've asked, how do you get information about potential students' rights violations? How do you know whether you would like to partner with that specific student?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. So what we're doing, part of the reason why we're doing the outreach to groups on the ground in states and localities is both to identify what the top priority issues are that we need to address through litigation, but also to help identify potential clients. And so that, many of the groups that we're working with, for instance, might do individual litigation in school discipline cases or in special education cases or, related education civil rights issues cases. And so they come up with basically the same fact pattern that they're dealing with in case after case after case after case at the local level with individual clients. And they can then share that with us, both in terms of identifying the issue for potential impact litigation, class action litigation, but also to, potentially see if some of those clients that they've worked with might actually be amenable to being plaintiffs and class representatives as well.
Great. Do other folks have questions? You can feel free to just say it over the line or put it into the chat feature. The person who asked the previous question says, thank you, Miriam. So we appreciate your responses.
And let me also say that I know from my prior work with you all that there are many coalitions that you all lead that include folks who are direct service providers for kids and families. And so, it could be that some of those coalition partners in coalitions, either that you lead or that you're part of at the state level or local level, may in fact have access to plaintiffs and specific cases that might be representative of some bigger problems going on that need to be addressed through more impact litigation. So so that's potentially something that you all have, that those coalitions may include groups that aren't necessarily connected to the litigation sphere, so maybe they haven't been included yet in the discussions we've had, but that certainly could be a role that folks could play if they're interested in helping to work on some of this litigation angle. And one thing that I can note too is we've actually filed our first case. So last Thursday, the 3 members of the Education Civil Rights Alliance, along with 3 other organizations, for a total of 6, both 3 attorney organizations and then 3 plaintiff organizations, filed suit against the U.S. Department of Education and Betsy DeVos, Secretary of Education, with regard to her illegal rescission and new guidance on Title IX sexual violence and sexual assault. And so so that was one example of the type of collaborative effort that we're expecting to do in terms of enforcing education civil rights. Obviously, that was a more high visibility one since it's against the feds. We will be doing a lot of our work, though, at the state and local level, but that just happened to be something that the opportunity presented itself and the need presented itself, and we were able to have some of our allies come together to file that. And the National Center for Youth Law, which houses and convenes the Education Civil Rights Alliance, was one of those 3 legal organizations that filed the case.
I have a question. This is Jordan Pasmantir from Committee for Children.
Uh-huh. How are you?
Doing well, all right. It was great to watch your presentation. Thank you. I've just got a few comments and questions. So it'd be great to get more involved and figure out where our potential places of opportunity exist. I'm wondering, are there easy ways for us to take what you're currently doing and promote it on social media, share with our clients and base? Have you ramped up to that level yet, so we can start, broadcasting a little bit more at the work that's underway?
Absolutely, and in fact, I'll go back to let's see. There we are. To the second to last slide. So we have a Twitter account. We have a Facebook account. Being liked and shared is a wonderful thing. So happy to have you all connect in that way, just at least as a first gauge. Certainly, last week when we did file the action against the Department of Education, there was quite a bit of Twitter and Facebook back and forth. And so it'd be great if you want to like and share, and and again, very open to other ways over time that folks can be involved as well.
Great. And then one more thing. So right now, Committee for Children is active in federal legislation and several different state legislation. But we're in more of a respond as the opportunity arises stance. There will come a time, however, when we're able to run a campaign on legislation that we help craft and introduce. Are you guys in a place where you're a resource to sort of help refine the policy, the language involved with those bills?
We could probably connect you with folks that could help on that, because I think a lot of the legal minds that are brilliant and wonderful and part of our alliance, not counting me, I'm not one of them, but our member organizations have really some terrifically brilliant legal minds, and so we could probably help connect you with those folks. It's, you know, as I said, since the Alliance itself isn't doing policy, that's not going to be kind of an official role of the Alliance, but given that there is this great legal expertise and that obviously that can sometimes help in terms of drafting legislation, you know, we might be able to play a role to help connect you to the right people on a particular issue.
Great. And then just an offer from my end is, you know, we have connection to about 20,000 different schools in the country, and to the extent what you're doing is applicable to them, we're happy to share.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Happy to connect by email. If you send me an email so I know your contact information, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll shoot you
email.
a note. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts, comments, suggestions, ideas?
Well, if nobody has anything else, Miriam, do you feel comfortable wrapping up right now?
Sure. Let me ask one more question. Just to what extent have you all done amicus briefs in cases? Is that something that either you've done or you haven't done but you're interested potentially in doing?
This is Jordan again. I've filed amicus briefs in other organizations I've worked for. I think it's a great thing to get involved with. Would love to do that as the opportunity arises. Just, you know, tap us when you get the opportunity.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you.
All right, and with that, I think we're good to close.
Great.
So, yeah, thank you so much, Miriam, for this excellent presentation. I know I really enjoyed it, and I hope other folks on the line did as well. Like I said at the beginning, this webinar was recorded, and it will be distributed to folks on the line and shared with other partnership members as well. And so we thank everybody for participating today, and also especially to our lovely presenter for introducing us to your work.
Great. Well, and thank you everyone for listening and being part of it. And as I say, my email inbox and phone are always open, so feel free to contact me if you have any questions or thoughts.
All right. Well, thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.